Chapter 19 of The House of a Thousand Candles. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The House of a Thousand Candles by Meredith Nicholson. Chapter 19. I Meet an Old Friend. When I reached the house I found, to my astonishment, that the window I had left open as I scrambled out the night before was closed. I dropped my bag and crept to the front door, thinking that if Bates had discovered my absence it was useless to attempt any further deception. I was amazed to find the great doors of the main entrance flung wide, and in real alarm I ran through the hall and back to the library. The nearest door stood open, and as I peered in, a curious scene disclosed itself. A few of the large cathedral candles still burned brightly in several places, their flame rising strangely in the gray morning light. Books had been taken from the shelves and scattered everywhere, and sharp implements had cut ugly gashes in the shelving. The drawers containing sketches and photographs had been pulled out and their contents thrown about and trampled underfoot. The house was as silent as a tomb, but as I stood on the threshold trying to realize what had happened, something stirred by the fireplace, and I crept forward listening until I stood by the long table beneath the great chandelier. Again I heard a sound as of some animal waking and stretching, followed by a moan that was undoubtedly human. Then the hands of a man clutched the farther edge of the table, and slowly, and evidently with infinite difficulty, a figure rose, and the dark face of Bates, with eyes blurred and staring strangely, confronted me. He drew his body to its height and leaned heavily upon the table. I snatched a candle and bent toward him to make sure my eyes were not tricking me.
"Mr. Glenarm! Mr. Glenarm!"
he exclaimed in broken whispers.
"It is Bates, sir."
"What have you done? What has happened?" I demanded. He put his hand to his head uncertainly and gaped as though trying to gather his wits. He was evidently dazed by whatever had occurred, and I sprang around and helped him to a couch. He would not lie down, but sat up, staring and passing his hand over his head. It was rapidly growing lighter, and I saw a purple and black streak across his temple where a bludgeon of some sort had struck him. "What does this mean, Bates? Who has been in the house?"
"I can't tell you, Mr. Glenarm."
"Can't tell me? You will tell me or go to jail. There's been mischief done here, and I don't intend to have any nonsense about it from you. Well?" He was clearly suffering, but in my anger at the sight of the wreck of the room I grasped his shoulder and shook him roughly.
"It was early this morning," he faltered. "About 2 o'clock. I heard noises in the lower part of the house. I came down, thinking likely it was you, and remembering that you had been sick yesterday."
"Yes, go on." The thought of my truancy was no balm to my conscience just then.
"As I came into the hall, I saw lights in the library. As you weren't down last night, the room hadn't been lighted at all. I heard steps and someone tapping with a hammer."
"Yes, a hammer. Go on." It was then the same old story. The war had been carried openly into the house. But Bates, just why should anyone connected with the conspiracy injure Bates, who stood so near to Pickering, its leader? The fellow was undoubtedly hurt. There was no mistaking the lump on his head. He spoke with painful difficulty. That was not assumed, I felt increasingly sure as he went on.
"I saw a man pulling out the books and tapping the inside of the shelves. He was working very fast, and the next thing I knew he let in another man through one of the terrace doors, the one there that still stands a little open."
He flinched as he turned slightly to indicate it, and his face twitched with pain. "Never mind that. Tell the rest of your story."
"Then I ran in, grabbed one of the big candelabra from the table, and went for the nearest man. They were about to begin on the chimney breast there. It was Mr. Glenarm's pride in all the house, and that accounts for my being there in front of the fireplace. They rather got the best of me, sir."
"Clearly, I see they did. You had a hand-to-hand fight with them, and being 2-to-1—"
"No, there were two of us, don't you understand? 2 of us. There was another man who came running in from somewhere, and he took sides with me. I thought at first it was you. The robbers thought so too, for one of them yelled, 'Great God, it's Glenarm!' just like that. But it wasn't you. Quite another person."
"That's a good story so far. And then what happened?"
"I don't remember much more, except that someone soused me with water That helped my head considerably, and the next thing I knew I was staring across the table there at you." "Who were these men, Bates? Speak up, quickly." My tone was peremptory. Here was, I felt, a crucial moment in our relations. "Well," he began deliberately, "I dislike to make charges against a fellow man, but I strongly suspect one of the men of being—" "Yes, tell the whole truth, or it will be the worse for you." "I very much fear one of them was Ferguson, the gardener over the way. I'm disappointed in him, sir." "Very good. And now for the other one." "I didn't get my eyes on him. I had closed with Ferguson, and we were having quite a lively time of it when the other one came in. Then the man who came to my help mixed us all up. He was a very lively person, and what became of Ferguson and the rest of it I don't know." There was food for thought in what he said. He had taken punishment in defense of my property. The crack on his head was undeniable, and I could not abuse him or question his veracity with any grace, not, at least, without time for investigation and study. However, I ventured to ask him one question. "If you are guessing, shouldn't you think it quite likely that Morgan was the other man?" He met my gaze squarely. "I think it wholly possible, Mr. Glenarm." "And the man who helped you, who in the devil was he?" "Bless me, I don't know. He disappeared. I'd like mightily to see him again." "Humph! Now you'd better do something for your head. I'll summon the village doctor if you say so." "No, thank you, sir. I'll take care of it myself." "And now we'll keep quiet about this. Don't mention it or discuss it with anyone." "Certainly not, sir." He rose and staggered a little, but crossed to the broad mantel shelf in the great chimney breast, rested his arm upon it for a moment, passed his hand over the dark wood with a sort of caress, then bent his eyes upon the floor littered with books and drawings and papers torn from the cabinets and all splashed with tallow and wax from the candles. The daylight had increased until the havoc wrought by the night's visitors was fully apparent. The marauders had made a sorry mess of the room, and I thought Bates's lip quivered as he saw the wreck. It would have been a blow to Mr. Glenarm. The room was his pride, sir. He went out toward the kitchen, and I ran upstairs to my own room. I cursed the folly that had led me to leave my window open, for undoubtedly Morgan and his new ally, St. Agatha's gardener, had taken advantage of it to enter the house. Quite likely, too, they had observed my absence, and this would undoubtedly be communicated to Pickering. I threw open my door and started back with an exclamation of amazement. Standing at my chiffonier, between two windows, was a man, clad in a bath gown, my own, I saw with fury, his back to me, the razor at his face, placidly shaving himself. Without turning, he addressed me, quite coolly and casually, as though his being there was the most natural thing in the world. "Good morning, Mr. Glenarm. Rather damaging evidence, that costume. I suppose it's the custom of the country for gentlemen in evening clothes to go out by the window and return by the door. You might think the other way round preferable." "Larry!" I shouted. "Jack, kick that door shut and lock it," he commanded in a sharp, severe tone that I remembered well and just now welcomed in him. "How, why, and when? Never mind about me. I'm here, thrown the enemy off for a few days, and you give me lessons in current history first, while I climb into my armor. Pray pardon the informality." He seized a broom and began work upon a pair of trousers to which mud and briars clung tenaciously. His coat and hat lay on a chair, they, too, much the worse for rough wear. There was never any use in refusing to obey Larry's orders, and as he got into his clothes I gave him in as few words as possible the chief incidents that had marked my stay at Glenarm House. He continued dressing with care, helping himself to a shirt and collar from my chiffonier and choosing with unfailing eye the best tie in my collection. Now and then he asked a question tersely, or again he laughed or swore direly in Gaelic. When I had concluded the story of Pickering's visit and of the conversation I overheard between the executor and Bates in the church porch, Larry wheeled around with the scarf half tied in his fingers and surveyed me commiseratingly. "And you didn't rush them both on the spot and have it out?" "No, I was much too taken aback, for one thing." "I dare say you were." "And for another, I didn't think the time ripe. I'm going to beat that fellow, Larry, but I want him to show his hand fully before we come to a smash-up.